Thanks everyone for inviting me to this. And it's really nice to return to Rice and the Chow Center after giving a presentation about 8 months ago with when I was wearing another hat as an English scholar. Today I really want to talk about my role as I guess an archivist. I serve on the board of directors for the South Asian American Digital Archive. And I'd like to start by just saying a few words about our organization and our approach to archiving materials. We are a volunteer-based nonprofit organization that aims to document, preserve, and provide access to the history of the South Asian American community. We have no physical repositories. This is basically our archive. All of our materials are digitized images, audio and video recordings, and transcriptions. And we're a fairly young organization and still fairly small. About a year ago at this time, we had roughly 8 items in our archive. When I started this presentation a few weeks ago, we had 260 items, and as of yesterday, we had 327. So all this said, things are moving very rapidly for us. And many of the questions that are being raised in this conference, how do we understand our own practice of archiving? How has digitization changed our relationship to materials? These are questions, and I think a lot of people will agree, these are questions that one rarely worries about on a conceptual level when you're working with the digital archive, because they appear on a day-to-day pragmatic level when you're collecting and encoding. So every time we come across an item that seems to add to this broad field we've outlined as the history of South Asian America, we're asked to consider how any such item affects the scope of our archive. And that scope keeps growing. So many of our materials are published articles, which means they're neither ephemeral, really, or strictly archival. Here's an article from the Literary Digest dated March 10th, 1923, entitled "Hindus Too Brunette to Vote Here." The article weighs in on the U.S. Supreme Court decision in 1923, which would make South Asians ineligible for U.S. citizenship on the basis that they were not in fact white, which was an argument that was made at this time, but that they were brunette or brown. The article is readily available in most major university libraries, and insofar as the domain of archives are kind of unpublished materials, this wouldn't fit into the traditional definition of what constitutes an archive. Nevertheless, our decision to include it is based solely on the fact that it contributes to the South Asian American story, and so it's in. Another collecting practice our archive does is consolidate materials that have already been preserved in existing archives, but kind of reframing them to fit into SADA. This is really something that only digital archives can do, I think, since what we're trading in is not the actual physical object. We've been able to collaborate with universities and nonprofit organizations across the country. So what you're looking at is from the Wyck Brooks paper at the University of Pennsylvania. Wyck Brooks was a literary critic, and he was based at some point at Stanford University. One of his colleagues and friends was a guy named Har Dayal, who was the founder of the Ghadar Party, a San Francisco-based political organization that actively agitated for the overthrowing of British colonial rule in India. This collection of letters spans 3 decades, and we can see Dayal's political transformation as he describes his early efforts to meet fellow radicals on the West Coast and how he subsequently had to flee the country after being arrested for spreading anarchist propaganda. Here, this object here is from the University of Iowa's digital collection on the circuit Chautauqua. How many people know what that? All right. So this was a movement in rural America which brought lecturers to small towns, mainly in the Midwest, and they would kind of lecture under a pitched tent. And these pamphlets that we collected from University of Iowa were advertisements for this Iowa PhD student who would eventually become a professor, Sudhindra. And he did these lectures on the circuit, and these lectures included titles like The Awakened Orient or American Businessman in the Far East. And the pamphlets always contain this language of Bose's liminal position. On one hand, describing him as, this was actually a newspaper described him as a sunburned white man with perfect English. And on the other, there was a constant attention paid to his Hindu costume, which you can kind of see over there. And here, this is the result of a collaboration with the University of Chicago, and this is from their pamphlet collection. These are handwritten flyers for ad hoc meetings by students at the University of Chicago to protest the declaration of emergency in India in 1975. Eventually, this group would form an organization called Indians for Political Freedom, and among the list of demands, this was to include the, the demand was to stop the victimization of Indian dissenters in the U.S. Some of the materials we collect fit squarely into this kind of traditional category of ephemera, as one set of archivists defined it, those everyday impermanent items produced irregularly and designed to use and then throw away. So here's an autographed postcard of the singer Kuldip Ray Singh. There's really so few references to this guy. He was dubbed the Kashmirian crooner by Life magazine, and he made his debut on the Groucho Marx show. I put the picture of Natalie Wood here because of all the controversy we've been hearing about her death, but there's amazing pictures of all these fans saying, they call them Cool Deep, C-O-O-L, Cool Dip, actually. But anyway. So that's something that, I consider ephemera, and it's hard to know what to do with it. Here's another example. This is a check, a donation check to Dilip Singh Sound, who was the first Indian member of the U.S. Congress, the first Asian American congressman. And incidentally, the check was from Joseph Wapner, who would later reign on the syndication program People's Court. Random, So it's never clear what the value of these materials are, if they constitute objects of enduring value, as archivists put it. That is, if they constitute usefulness or significance based on the evidential or historical information they contain. Moreover, how do they contribute to the organization's goal of documenting and preserving South Asian American history? That's a tough sell. At best, it seems most of these materials would appear as footnotes to a larger story. But we still collect it, and as most folks involved in an archive will probably sympathize, I hope you sympathize, you're never quite sure what the value of an object will be for the current user or the future user. In our case, because so much of this material of South Asian American history has not been exposed to any public, we err on the side of collecting rather than discarding. And our sense of what South Asian American history constitutes expands the more we collect. And this raises what I think and hope Sada's critical intervention is, and that is to contest what has been understood as the dominant narrative of South Asians in America. For all intents and purposes, this narrative of the South Asian diaspora in the US usually starts in 1965. That year, Lyndon B. Johnson passed the Hart-Celler Act, which lifted a decades-long restriction to immigrants from the Third World. So this legislation effectively opened the doors to a major migration of South Asians, who in some ways have kind of seized the narrative, myself included probably, fitting, and this really fits into the model minority myth. So part of what we've tried to do with SADA is to recover materials that point towards earlier migrations and during a period of far more restricted immigration. In the first, actually I didn't want to go there yet. In the first third of the 20th century, in fact, around 30,000 male migrants from British colonial India arrived in the Pacific Northwest in the farms, canneries, to work in the farms, canneries, and lumberyards. During the same period, students also trickled into the U.S., several of whom became involved in the Ghadar Party and the India Home Rule League of New York, as well as other organizations as the Hindustan Association of America, which issued a monthly called the Hindustani Student, and the Union of Christian Students of India and America, which put out the Indian Christian Student, which is right next to that. What has been harder to document, however, has been the lives of the migrant laborers, whose written trail is scant at best. So we've had to look at other ways to represent that story within the archive. And I want to focus the rest of this presentation on specifically two artifacts that pertain to this earlier history of migrant laborers, and specifically how these materials might make us think about history's relationship to the marginal and to the ephemeral. So this is artifact one. In 1907, a soil scientist named Adolphus W Mangum Jr. had been working in the Puget Sound area of northern Washington state. Adolphus Jr. was the son of A.W. Mangum, a Methodist minister and teacher at the University of North Carolina, and the nephew of Willie Person Mangum, a U.S. Senator of North Carolina, and a founder and leading member of the short-lived American Whig Party. the family's role in American and North Carolinian politics was considered significant and valuable enough to be archived when their papers were stored at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. One of the preserved letters in that collection was written on September 8, 1907. Adolphus Jr., the soil scientist, probably feeling homesick in Washington State, wrote to his mother. So it's almost totally illegible, so I'll read the first few lines. Dear Mama, I've been out in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains all the past week and just returned to Bellingham last night. I'm getting behind in my work on account of the difficulty in getting over such a rough country and because of so many interruptions which I did not count on being up against. For pages, Mangum writes about the various troubles he's having. He has an assistant who just doesn't work well with him. But by the fourth page, he comments on an interesting occurrence in Bellingham. We had a riot here about a week ago. The people ran out the Hindus, who have come here in great numbers and have been working in the lumber mills. These Hindus came here from India and are British subjects, so the English government may investigate the riots and make the people here pay for what they did. These Hindus are very undesirable citizens. They are dirty and mean and will work for wages that a white man can't live on. I'm not in sympathy with the laboring men who started this riot because they ought to mob the mill men who hire these laborers rather than mob the Hindus themselves. If the mill owners did not hire them, they would not come here in such crowds. Mangum's letter constitutes what is perhaps one of the few first-person accounts of what would come to be known as the Bellingham anti-Hindu riot. On September 4th, 1907, 2 days after the Labor Day parade rolled through town and labor leaders made inflammatory speeches against migrant laborers, a gang of white men attacked and chased 2 Sikh men. One escaped while the other was beaten and stripped of his turban and clothing. That night, a mob gathered, from some accounts reaching upward to 500, and chased the South Asians out of town. Subsequently, local newspapers like the Bellingham Herald, the Everett Herald, the American Revel captured the story in headlines that read, "Hindus hounded from city," or "Mob drives Hindus from homes in Bellingham." But there's nothing quite like Mangum, the disinterested bystander's account, which speaks to the absorption of a discourse that had been actively promoted in the newspapers years earlier. So this is an article, "Have we a Dusky Peril? Hindu hordes invading the state." And that really is almost exactly a year before this. So, I mean, you can see that, Hindu hordes, there's also another term that comes up at this time, the tide of turbans. This is a discourse that's really being generated. So that's artifact 1, and I want to point to artifact 2. In 1914, a Japanese-American farmer named George Shima, he was born Ushijima Kinji, commissioned a film crew from Japan to capture his California home and farm. Shima was by that time a man of certain wealth and stature. He was already known as the Potato King of California for his vast agricultural empire in the Stockton-Sacramento Delta, producing 80% of California's potato crop. 5 years earlier, he had become the first president of the Japanese Association of America. The film that resulted consisted of a series of grainy black and white shots of Shima's properties, cut with Japanese title cards that dryly describe the footage. Examples of this are a drive on the Levee Road, the potato harvest, hay baling, etc. A few minutes in, however, the camera captures what might very well be the first motion picture footage of South Asians in America. A narrator announces migrant laborers from India, and the camera records racially indiscriminate men in straw hats and white shirts, quickly tilling the fields. Soon after, in a section on onion fields, the camera pans across 6 men, a few in turbans, a few in caps, posing proudly with the camera. So I wanted just to show that clip.
Onion fields.
So we'd actually found this footage from the Internet Archive, which is Brewster Kahl's massive project to digitize and upload free content for other from other libraries. And the Shima film had originally been digitized by the California Audiovisual Preservation Project from a reel that was stored at San Joaquin Delta College Shima Center. So I'd like, for the sake of argument and for the sake of this conference's theme, to push against the usual notion of understanding these traces as simply marginal. That is, the South Asian in the margin of Anglo-American history, or the subaltern who's marginal to the nation, which implies a relationship between periphery and center, the minor and the major. The minor and the major story. What if we consider this fleeting presence of the South Asian as not just marginal, but related to what we call ephemeral? When dealing specifically with migrant labor, the term ephemerality raises not only the issue of the permanence and transience of materials, but the broader issue of the permanence and transience of subjects. The historian Nayan Shah recently raised this issue of permanence versus transience as it specifically pertains to the conceptual stabilizations that haunt the work of historians of early 20th century America. Shah writes, "The availability and potency of state documentation of settlement and property relations undermine our ability to conceptualize mobility and transience as central concepts in historical analysis." What Shah's really talking about is the privileging of certain subjects of history because of their presence and the dominant position within the archives of the state. Shah finds that legal cases form one of the major archives to help make sense of the space the migrant laborer traveled, the non-familial narrative, the non-propertied narrative. And this is something I think that Sada has been making efforts to do, though there's clearly a lot of absences in our archive, as it exists now. But my larger point here is that when archiving the history of transient laborers or transient subjects whose relationship to the state is already fraught and whose relationship to land, rights, and paperwork is ephemeral, evidence doesn't appear in easily archived objects. When the diaspora's relationship to the printed word and to published materials is tenuous, then we have to turn to unlikely sources. In the first third of the century, when the number of South Asians in America was so small, it was students and activists who left the largest written trail to be recovered. But for the laboring class whose relationship to printed materials was far more tenuous, one only finds traces that we've seen here. And I think these are the spaces that ephemera might fill. And this, I think, is one of the key challenges of a community archive of this sort, a path we need to pursue, otherwise we risk, once again, emphasizing the already dominant narratives of South Asian America. So, thank you.